We have a 1.0 version of search, and to be a little bit clearer about what that 1.0 search is, I shall share my screen. So hopefully you will now see the IIIF Content Search API 1.0. So search is not searching for manifests or collections or objects. It's once you have found an object, then searching within that thing. And it could still be a collection that you're searching within, as well as a manifest. But it's the Search API searches for content as represented in IIIF by annotations. So it's really sort of the full text search or comment search rather than searching for objects. So it interacts mostly with the presentation API rather than the image API. And there are some very easy patterns in terms of how to get back presentation API compatible responses that you can simply drop into the presentation API or a consumer of the presentation API. So that said, there is a reasonable number of issues that have been raised since search was published in 2016, if I recall. Yeah, in 2016. Which we can see momentarily. So, although there's only 13 issues, many of them are pretty substantial and involve quite a lot of work. So, for example, sorting of the responses, it could either be by time, or it could be by the order in the manuscript, sorry, in the manifest, or similar. So that would be quite a substantial change. Search scope could include annotations on resources other than canvases, but then you need some way to view them. There's also interactions with version 3 of the presentation API that we would need to consider, including searching for AV content that's annotated onto the canvas, as well as textual. So that means searching by time and searching within a canvas rather than just for the canvas. So we have let's see if I can find that quickly, or Glenn, if you have it open somewhere, that would be useful. The charter for a search TSG.
I've put it in the chat, Rob, if you need it.
Thank you kindly. Which has not been formally approved yet, but sort of lays out where we want to go with search. So the sort of this primary one is the lack of compatibility with presentation 3. In that presentation 3 uses JSON LD 1.1 and some new improved best practices about how to structure JSON-LD documents. The current version predates the web annotation work, so it uses open annotation, and while they're very, very similar, they're not identical. So there's some minor updates there, and the one that I already mentioned about the time-based media. There is also some interest in having integration with the authentication spec, where there is a TSG that's just starting up to work on that, as we talked about earlier this week. Because if there is resources that require authentication and you were to find them via search, then surely auth and search would need to be able to work together. So we would want to have some consistent method in search that worked with the same strategy in auth. And then these also, others were minor, relatively minor issues, as we see in the list. So, yeah, as Josh notes in the chat, it's coming up for review in the next technical review committee meeting, which, if I recall, is later this month, Glenn, or is it early in January?
The meeting is this Wednesday coming, and then there'll be 2 weeks of voting. So we'll get the results at the end of December.
So the thought for the deliverables for what we want to do in the TSG, version 2.0 Search API. So it does need to be 2.0, not 1.1, in order to be in line with the presentation API. So of course we lost all of our unloved @ symbols. So it's just ID and type, not @ID and @type. And we gained a bunch of new improvements, such as language maps. So in order to include those improvements from the presentation API in with the search API, we would need to go to 2.0. But there is, as we already discussed this week, some challenges around authentication and in particular alignment with the rest of the web and where we're going with third-party cookies. So we might need to add auth, the auth integration as a subsequent release, perhaps 2.1, rather than in baseline of 2.0. So we want to start the group in January, have use cases to provide the scope for the work by May, and a sort of basic syntax update also by May of next year, such that people looking to implement from scratch rather than update an existing implementation don't have to wait around for all of the work to be done. They can simply start with this sort of syntax only version. Then a beta for the following year with all of the improvements from the issues and so forth, and then a period of implementation experience through to October, such that by the end of 22 we would be able to hopefully have enough experience and confidence to publish a 2.0 search API. So the reason we have the sort of proposed recommendation is that, of course, the TRC is the final adjudicator for whether specs are ready to go out as final. So this bullet is essentially by October 22, we would expect to have a document ready for Search 2.0 to go to the TRC for further discussion and hopefully approval. But if not, that's fine. There would be good reasons. We could go back and fix it. So hence putting a final we're going to publish on this date on the roadmap just doesn't really make sense given our process. Okay, so one of the things that we thought we would want to do for search at this point, e.g. before the TSG really gets started, is to work on this first line item and get ideas about use cases for searching for annotations within the IIIF context from the group, from the community. So I guess at this point, it would be good to first see if there are any questions or comments about search or the upcoming TSG or the process by which we would get to a 2.0. And I suspect you can just unmute and talk. Mike.
Okay. Hi. Yeah. My brief question along with this is, given the length of time for this roadmap, and the major difference between the annotation versions in presentation version 3 and what's currently in use in search version 1, is there possibly some consideration for doing a kind of quick and easy release that just standardizes that annotation model? Because I think as more people move to presentation 3, there becomes then a kind of increasing burden if people want search, that they have to support both annotation models, not only in the kind of back end for delivery, but also the viewers or whatever usage in the front end. That's certainly going to be a big consideration for us. In Edinburgh, we're about to do a big revamp of all of our collections holdings, which will include kind of finally pushing out presentation version 3 as our main way of delivering IIIF, but there's a lot of excitement here for having search everywhere. And so, yeah, I'm kind of really curious, is there something we can do about that, or do we just kind of say, you have to support both of them for the next 2 years, or next year and almost 2 years?
Yeah, so the issue is around the semantic versioning. So yeah, this is the being that if we were to release a sort of a quick 2.0 that all it does is update the syntax, that would have to be 2.0 because it would be backwards incompatible with 1. And then we would then have a 3.0, hopefully within the space of 12 to 18 months, which for people who are not sort of directly involved in the work, I think there's a bit of a negative connotation to that the 2.0 was had some fatal flaw, which wouldn't be the case. It's just not backwards compatible. So it would be totally fine. But having a 2.0 and then quickly followed by a 3.0 without any sort of intervening time or discussion might really not send the right message, I think. So then that's one reason. But also, and to that point, and really to your point, it would be good to be able to have folks work on the 2.0 or the next big version with the improvements, and hence that's why we wanted to have a pretty quick turnaround on the syntax alignment draft. So sort of an alpha 2.0 without the features that people could play with. Having that available as quickly as possible, I think, really is important. A 0.9 or 2. There isn't a way of doing it using semantic versioning, but anyway, a 0.9 of 2.0 would, the quicker we can get there, the more likely we are to see adoption.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Just a quick question, would there be any other breaking changes though, other than the syntax? Because if we're adding new features, that's not breaking changes. So it would be 2 and then it would be 2.1, you know, if auth was brought in or something. It wouldn't necessarily have to jump straight to 3 unless there was some other major breaking change. Or am I misunderstanding Sam?
No. So if there were no other breaking changes introduced, then indeed, yes, we could get away with a 2.0 and a 2.1. I don't think we know whether there will be breaking changes or not. For example, if there was a requirement to search by language, and we wanted to have that aligned with the syntax, then the query parameter structure might change to enable the syntax and the queries to be aligned, which would then not change the response, so that wouldn't break, but the query structure would change. So then that would cause a 3.0 for essentially no reason. You know, often doesn't make it.
Thank you.
But yeah, no, I think perhaps as part of the TSG, that could be an action item, you know, a task that we could go through and look at all of the requirements, and if by, you know, sort of May, June next year, all of the requirements we're confident we can do without a breaking change, then maybe we do 2.0 as a syntax update, 2.1 as the additional features, and 2.2 as adding in auth once the auth work can be integrated. Tom,
my only observation there would be that as an implementer, I think I would be highly confident about the stability of a syntax aligned version of search, even if it didn't have the label, 2.0 official, because unless we've done something fundamentally wrong so far, and the evidence of how the search has been adopted suggests otherwise, I would think, and this is obviously a massive hostage to fortune, so that recording is not a good idea at this point. But I would be very comfortable in deploying a syntax aligned 3, and then acknowledging that actually, well, maybe a couple of kind of parameter tweaks or things like that, as well as all the additional stuff that I could implement on top of it. But I would be, like, say compared to auth, for example, I'd be way more comfortable doing releasing in May 2021 a syntax aligned version and implementing that. That's my personal opinion, and not anything else. Actually, one observation I'd also just on the use cases. So obviously, the kind of background to search is search of annotations. But I guess it's when considering use cases for search, it's important not to only think of annotations that are kind of existing there, created by humans on the server. The format of search results is annotations, but the origin of those doesn't have to be. So the search is often put to use to return kind of full text, word highlighted results. And obviously, it's not returning in those scenarios annotations that were kind of in any way existing in an annotation server, for example. It's synthesizing those annotations as results on the fly. And so I think all those kind of use cases that might be related to that are important to consider as well, rather than considering we're searching for things that maybe humans created via crowdsourcing or machines created via tagging. There are synthetically on the fly produced annotations that are equally applicable to search scenarios.
Good. Are there any other questions or thoughts or discussion about what search is, where we are, where we're going, what the process is, and process for getting there?
I'll just say that I like the idea you proposed, Rob, of having it a task of the TSG to do this assessment of whether there's a sense of confidence that one could make subsequent changes without them being breaking. I will say my money is on no, but it's a useful exercise.
Shall we put it into the charter? Glenn, has it gone to TRC for review?
It has, although technically we can edit it before the meeting, but then when the meeting, no more editing.
Yep. As future members of the TSG, if we like that and propose it, then so be it.
Could I ask, when we're talking about this the question I put in the chat, but when we're talking about syntax alignment to bring it up to 3, does that automatically bring with it the AV stuff, or is that another step in that list of tasks?
That would be another step, because in order to query for duration, we would need a parameter for querying durations. So I guess if there was some of the simple stuff would probably work, but as long as you could just sort of stuff it into queue, but there's no in 0 point something we had the notion of box, which was search within a particular region of a canvas. And the motivation was things like Princeton's 150,000 pixel scroll, which is only one canvas. So if you search and you don't have any sort of limitations, you might get hits all over the scroll and no useful way of defining it. No, I'm really only interested in this first part of the scroll. But then as AV started to progress towards 3.0, we realized whatever we do now in terms of the spatial part will need to be redone in the future anyway, in order to accommodate the temporal part as well as the spatial part. So we then intentionally took it out because box is really spatio-temporal fragment rather than just a spatial fragment. So we would need to put that back in, and thus that would be a new feature. So it would not come just as syntax, but so long as it didn't break the syntax, it could be, to Mike and Tom's point, it could be a new minor version to add that functionality rather than a major version.
Thanks.
But yeah, people who have implemented this search spec more recently than me. Is that correct, or would we get it for free? No one's at least preparing to step up. If you had transcriptions,
if it was supplementing the queue and not a required parameter, then it wouldn't be breaking, right? It wouldn't be necessarily be for 3.
Yep.
Well, actually, I was wondering if I can ask one little question. Is it possible to make somehow to search across the whole collection, not only on object? In text searching, I think, OCR content through whole collection.
Yes. So the way that, which I'm not going to try and look for in the spec, the way that it works is you would have the search service, which I can find. At top. You'd have this sort of search service associated with the collection rather than associated with the individual object. So that would then mean when using that service, I'm searching within the scope of the collection, and you would get hits to all of the different annotations, and thus they would then point to their canvas, and the canvas would need to point to the manifest to then you'd get the hits at the annotation level to then find the manifests to display. So then combined with some patterns from the content state API, that would then mean you could hopefully transfer them between clients as well as within a client.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is that which doesn't say collection, but that would be a good editorial change to explicitly add collection into that sentence.
Well, actually, I was asking about the collection level because I would like to several different collections from several different servers, and to make a unique search web app, unique search that can search in different collections from different sources.
So, and then you'd be looking to implement a service that
Yes.
clients would interact with that did that, or yeah. So then, if you that's essentially you would be publishing a collection of all of the manifests from all of the other collections, or a collection of collections, and then everything with the that filters down under that, you would be saying this service has the capability to search the annotations across all of these other
Great.
things.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the question. It's one that we should be clearer about in the spec. Any other questions? Former colleague said that you should always wait until the silence is uncomfortable. So I'm going to wait until there is uncomfortable levels of silence.
I'll just add a little comment to the one just made about, basically you can attach a IIIF search service to anything it makes sense to be searchable. But the thing to bear in mind is that the results, obviously if you're in a viewer and there's a search service declared on a manifest and you use that search service, then the context of the results is clearly the manifest. So you should have no trouble plotting those results or displaying them to the user. Whereas if you declared a search service on a kind of IIIF universe top level collection, you would have to ensure that each result had enough information to be findable. So if it's a region of a canvas that's part of a manifest, that's part of a collection, or whatever you need to do, you just need to make sure that those are the results are resolvable by a client consuming the results. But other than that, search within whatever you like, because no matter how big.
Great, thank you.
Well, shall we go on to use cases? So at the moment, the use cases for search have been primarily driven by textual search on top of the either transcribed or OCR'd content of an object. And thus the query parameters are pretty basic in that you have a space separated list of search terms that you throw into queue for the query. And it's up to the server to interpret what those terms, how the terms should interact. There can be the motivation, a space separated list of motivation terms, which is these ones, well, plus any other motivations, to be able to separate commentary annotations from tags from content that's supplementing now the page, augmenting it. Date, such that you can say, I'm looking for annotations that were made during this time, and user being identities of users that created the annotations. And I'll note that user is not something that IIIF talks about, even in authentication. So authentication is the process to, or is a workflow for the client to go through to ensure that the audience have authenticated sufficiently to get access to the image content. It's not a user account management system. So it doesn't do authorization. It doesn't even do authentication. It promotes the authentication of the user. So we don't have a tie over from authentication to this user. It's really if the backend annotation system knows about users, then put the value of the username into the slot. So, yeah. So what I think would be, what would help the TSG to hit the ground running would be a reasonable set of use cases that we could then discuss and see if they are already accounted for, or if they're not, then how can we enable them to be implemented. So for example, this one was one that I brought up earlier, limit search of annotation content by language. So it seems like a reasonable use case that I only want to see comments written in languages that I can speak, because why would I want to be presented with a bunch of comments in languages that I don't speak? But none of these parameters are about the language of the content. These are the terms within the content, the motivation for the annotation, date, when it was created, and the user that created it. So that would then be, so the user story, the use cases, for language. I do not speak Chinese, and I only speak English and French. I want to search for annotations that have content in English and French, because those are the only ones that I can read. So with that in mind, would people like to throw up some ideas for use cases that we could take down? Though I see a lot of chat. For folks who have been reading the chat as it's gone, is there anything that we should call out before moving on?
The chat was all prior to the use cases discussion, Rob.
Okay. So one use case was Andrea's about I want to enable search across collections, which does work, but we should call out in the spec.
I think that's a pretty common use case, although not widely implemented, but I think a lot of people would like to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just one sort of obvious implementation of that is I want to search within a multi-volume book that happens to be modeled as a collection. You know, that's a search across a collection, even if it just wouldn't seem that way to the user. So obviously that kind of thing should be supported and is, but maybe there should be an example of it.
Okay. What else?
Rob, are we looking for use cases that aren't already captured in the current issues?
Well, I think we could look for any use case.
Okay.
Maybe if people are drawing blanks, then we could go through the current issues.
Okay, right. Yeah.
But let's see first.
So I don't know if it's a use case per se, but one thing that's also would be interesting for us is the ability to specify the context of the result. So, for example, it's specifically thinking about OCR transcriptions. If you are searching, say, a single word, you may want to actually retrieve the whole paragraph as an annotation that word is part of, rather than just the highlight point for here is an individual word.
Yeah. That is covered with the before and after properties of the search result or the hit.
But there's no way to specify that you want that as the client. That's up to the server-side implementation to return that or not. So it's whether or not we
I see.
put in something where the client says, hey, I want this, but also, I want you to give me the paragraph it belongs to, if you can.
Oh, I see, yeah.
Yeah, I'd +1 that also at the page level. Certainly for some of our very long volumes, doing OCR search and getting back kind of paragraph or word level highlighting is not as useful as somewhere on this page is your search result. Maybe go there and then we'll resolve a more granular search for you.
Mike Appleby, would you like to say a little bit about the text granularity?
Yeah, sure. The text granularity extension sort of defines these levels based on a sort of survey of the different OCR formats. But in theory, we could have an extension to search that allowed you to pass one of those levels in and return, say, page level or block level hits rather than word level, and do that kind of filtering.
I think issue 764 in the current issues is, I think, that.
Yeah.
But maybe that's not quite the same as the original question. So, or is it actually? Would that 764, if you could use the text granularity terms as constraints on the query or hints on the query, would that meet the requirement?
That would be exactly what I was asking about. Yeah.
Cool.
I think one further extension of that would make client and server implementations even better would be the ability to then filter on particular canvases or something. So you could again do kind of a page level search of the whole manifest, and then once you're on a particular canvas, get word level hits.
We can link that issue to the published thing too.
So then, Chris, you'd sort of see a two-stage process.
Absolutely. Kind of do a very broad, not very granular search for performance reasons, and once the user can find the page or pages they're looking for, do a more targeted search that's maybe more granular.
Would in that scenario would the user manually initiate that second search, or would it be something that just happened? So I searched for I've got results on page 74, 127, and whatever, and so as soon as I navigate to page 74, the client can do the more granular search there and then on that, and on that page and decorate that page with word level hits.
Yeah, I could imagine that. I could also imagine a user wanting to say, search on the pages I'm looking at and get specific results for that. That's maybe less my concern, but perhaps a viable use case.
So that is also another existing issue. The next one up, search by annotation target. So the idea, I think, if I recall correctly, with this one was basically that you could say, I am looking for annotations on a particular canvas, and hence the target of the annotation will be the canvas. So put the canvas's identifier into a parameter to limit the, further limit the search.
I'm just
Yep.
this is a kind of question. So when I think of searching AV materials, I'm still thinking essentially of textual searches, because they're the parameters are textual and the results are textual. So even though I'm saying I'm searching AV, I'm probably searching transcripts, source from VTT or whatever, or commentary, or I'm still searching textual things. But is there some other kind of thing that IIIF search could cover that for AV that is not textual, whatever that might mean? Are there use cases around that? Yeah,
I think there's a couple use cases around the both kind of speech to text searching in AV, but also kind of related image searching in canvases, all of which kind of scare me as an implementer, especially because that probably involves significant compute resources and probably a longer time delay than it's going to take to actually search text. So it feels like we need some sort of asynchronous search pattern to support a use case like that.
Yeah. So they're kind of invented use case, which may not be something that anyone wants, so something we shouldn't spend time on. But the kind of non-textual search would be, I have an image here and I want to pass it to a server, and I want it to give me results that for the scenes that match that still frame, for example.
Yeah, which I think goes to Josh's point in the chat about machine learning related to images and image similarity search.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating idea. I guess the question is like, how real, like, are there people waiting on us to implement this in IIIF content search?
Yeah, I think that was my concern there, that there's actually lots of this kind of work going on, like finding repeated uses of images in manuscripts, all that kind of stuff. But that kind of work goes on quite happily without interoperability. It's what's the interoperability requirement for this kind of search? Now, obviously, textual searching of things in IIIF collections is massively useful, but is that other kind of searching actually an interoperable need, or is it just something people can get on quite happily with anyway?
I'd argue no. I'd say that maybe it's not an interoperable need, that I could be able to take a manifest from Mirador to UV and do image-based search in both those viewers. Seems kind of beyond the scope of that.
In the chat, a couple back, Joe mentions, I guess the count instances of a term would be common, e.g. how often is the word God used in the collection or of the thing being searched? So we do have that in the notion of a term list, which has the term, the matched thing, the search that would do the search for this particular term, and to your point, Joe, how many times that word occurs. So 15 birds, 3 biros, 9 births, and 21 birthdays. So why there is only 9 births but 21 birthdays, well, we'll leave up to people's imagination. So there's that one. That one is already covered, which is good. We have 10 minutes left. So any other use cases that we could consider? No need to worry about if they're already in the spec or not. Just things that you would like to be able to do, to Tom's point, in an interoperable way across systems.
Is there any interest in a,
sorry.
Is there any interest in a level 0 search that could be done entirely statically using Lunar or some other solution to bring interoperable search into the WAX ecosystem?
Yeah, at least in my recollection, we talked about sort of a level 0 search. If I recall the discussion, it was that the number of queries would be prohibitive, that you couldn't simply enumerate all the possible queries that could be expressed, and hence it would be practically impossible to do level 0, which for folks who haven't maybe been as involved in the IIIF specification work as others, level 0 is when you have a static set of content that provides you can simply write it to disk and it works. So you can express all of the tiles of an image as just images on disk and put them in the right place, and it looks like you've implemented in fact you have implemented the IIIF Image API. So the question is, can we do that with search? And I guess it's the same as tiles. If there was some way of informing the client, the consuming application, here is the sort of searches that will work, which is what we do with the tiles parameter in the info.json image, e.g. the consumer knows how to construct the URIs that will work for tiles. If there was some way to do that, then perhaps we could do a level 0. So maybe the term list could be static, and then simply the links, if I go back to the term list, could be, that was static. Then you would simply follow these links to get to the list of hits, which would be static. But you couldn't arbitrarily add new combinations of terms.
Rob, can I just untangle two little things there? So when we use the term level 0, we sometimes use that to mean kind of static. But I'm wondering if in this context, especially with the kind of Lunar thing at the beginning, we actually were talking about kind of serverless search, where the search is just happening using the browser, because the browser has downloaded enough enough material to build an index and can actually search as in detail and as fully as you like, but just happens to be running locally using something like Lunar. In which case, I guess the question for that scenario is, does the spec support that scenario, or is it making assumptions about client server that mean a kind of Lunar style search? I know Jason Rinaldo's done that as well. Would actually be out of the spec, even though it was fully using the spec. And then that's kind of one, level 0 meaning serverless. And then there's level 0 meaning statically prepared result sets, which is a different issue, I think.
Yeah.
And I posted a link in the chat a few minutes ago to this idea of using level 0 style static result sets to achieve the I want all the French transcriptions, I want all the English transcriptions, etc. Because they are, you know, there's a kind of service description for the search service that only allows a small number of possible parameter combinations, which you could prepare in advance statically. You know, it's like, I don't accept, you know, full text arbitrary queries, but I do accept these constraints, and I've prepared all the possible sets that match those constraints in advance, which is different from the Luna powered serverless style thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I saw a project that's in the Digital Humanities Conference at University of British Columbia a couple of weeks ago. Someone demoed a project where they were actually generating static result sets for every combination of terms in a small site. And I've been playing with it a little bit, but I mean, it'll be subject to the same constraints of scale as level 0 tiles and so on. But it would allow the small sites to participate in the big world of IIIF a little more. But clearly, it's a niche market.
Yeah. I think there's a real potential use for static search result sets where, you know, a free-form Q parameter is actually not permitted in the same way that in a level 0 image API, an arbitrary region or size is not permitted. Right. But all sorts of other useful things are that have a, you know, controllable set of possible static resources required to be made in advance.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, that you have to have a declaration of the possible terms in order to have then a set of pre-compiled answers. I think the other case that you were talking about, Tom, this idea of what it means to have a way to more efficiently implement a client-side search is kind of interesting, right? Because in the default case, you just need to be able to get all the annotations that you would want to search over. And that makes me think of kind of linked data fragments as an approach to implementing optimizations of general Sparkle queries without having to download the complete set of RDF by partitioning it into possibly usable chunks. And I don't know whether there's anything we could learn from that sort of approach to think about common ways of segmenting or providing bulk access to annotations that would make client-side implementation more feasible.
Because, I mean, in practice, the full text of a book is not a lot bigger than a big JPEG, or it might even be smaller. So, you know, the kind of bandwidth of downloading the whole lot to do whatever you like with on the client is really not much of an issue at the level of an individual book or manuscript. Obviously, it becomes an issue at the level of collections, but, you know, there's all sorts of stuff you could do locally. It's whether or not you're still on spec by doing that because of kind of client server assumptions in the spec.
As someone who's done some implementation, kind of actually very similar to Jason Rinaldo's blog post, which I wasn't aware of. Kind of I'm not sure it's a missing piece, but the piece that doesn't feel that great is being able to identify, you know, the content as being appropriate for searching, which you can kind of do with the resource profile attribute, and then somehow connecting up what you get from there to IIIF canvases and their URIs is maybe not very generic.
So perhaps a question for the TSG to tackle as part of the initial scoping discussion is the serverless search something that should be supported via the API, and if not, is there some other pattern that isn't a search API, but is perhaps just a recipe for the presentation API of if you want to enable client-side search, then do this.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to suspect it was the latter. I think the information in the presentation API is sufficient to drive a behavior like that.
Yeah. So I can imagine the search API simply saying, if you also want to provide a single resource that provides a client with the full text of the work, then do it like this. And that might just be a completely standard annotation list that has all the words at word level granularity. It'd be quite big, but it's not really that big if gzipped.
I was wondering about whether the standard could include the notion of how it expects the results of the search. Because a couple of the comments in the chat have been sort of commenting about more complex searching or even sort of server-side searching that might be done outside of the IIIF universe. But for the IIIF viewers or presentation systems to be able to then ingest the results of that search and present it as if it was doing a native local search, that could facilitate the connection of more complex searching, image-based searching or anything, to the IIIF structure. So if you've got within the API, you've got do a search and give me results, then display the results. As long as you document how the results are returned as a separate module to the presentation of the results, then other systems can give you results in that format. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Your eyebrows are looking puzzled, Tom.
Oh, sorry. Oh, well, most, well, in a sense, doesn't the search specification do that? I mean, that's its purpose, is it not? That
it probably does, but that's I don't know it very well. That's why I was asking.
Right, your implementation might be Solar or some Lucene back thing, or it might be something else, or it might be X or Y. But the way of normalizing it so that viewers understand it is the IIIF Search API.
Yeah. So to take the image search as an example, yep, we are indeed hitting time. The query parameter says, you put in a space-separated list of search terms, and they can be words or URIs. So you could treat a pointer, a URI to an image, as the input to a similarity search, and then you just get back the list of annotations which didn't paint that thing, which didn't paint that image anywhere. It was just here are the ones that match the query. And I think that would be a performant. Sorry, a conformant, not necessarily performant, a conformant implementation of the spec. Great. Well, thank you everyone for coming and for the great discussion. And please do, if this discussion was of interest, please do join the Search TSG when it is formed in the new year, so that we can continue the discussion and move forwards on getting Search 2.0 out the door for implementation, so that we can be better aligned with presentation 3 and with the new functionality that we've been discussing. Great. And we'll talk again in 13 minutes about the roadmap, which will be clearly highly related to what we were just talking about.